morning, Julia. Nice to be on.
Lovely to be on. To talk to you. Now, of course, you've got your digital secretary hat on today, because, of course, your full title, Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Secretary. But before we get to that, I'm sure you, as a keen sports fan, will want to talk about, again, it's the law now, British teen sensation in tennis, Emma Raducanu, and that extraordinary win overnight in America and reaching the US Open final this weekend. What are your thoughts?
Well, isn't it wonderful to wake up to that news? And what a fantastic summer of British sport we've had. You remember back to the Euros, England got to the final, then we were second in the Paralympics medal table, we were fourth in the Olympics. But I think whatever happens in the final, and I know Emma will do brilliantly, this will still be the crowning glory of a wonderful summer of British sport. And I, for one, I'm sure the whole nation are immensely proud of her. And what a tribute! What a strong and capable person she is.
Yeah, I don't know what you were doing at 18. I think I was waitressing and watching telly. I mean, these young people are absolutely extraordinary.
It is absolutely amazing. And the other thing is how there's all the commentary about her performance at Wimbledon. There's all the pressure after that, and then to come back after that magnificent performance at Wimbledon, and then pull this out shows such maturity as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, well, let's get down to what you're announcing today. And this is all about an overhaul of our data sector and better protection for the public from major data threats. What does it involve?
Well, now that we've left the EU, we have the opportunity to set our own data laws. And what I'm really trying to do with this is two things. First of all, get rid of pointless bureaucracy. So we all know those cookie consent banners. Does anyone actually know what they mean? Why do we have to have those? So we're consulting on getting rid of those unnecessary banners. But at the same time, let's deal with the stuff that really infuriates people. So those problem calls, the phone calls where you don't know where they got your number, they constantly ring you. There's clearly been a data breach there. So we're going to massively increase the fines for that, up to 4% of those companies' global revenue. That could run to tens or even hundreds of millions of pounds. And I think that is an example of how we can use leaving the EU to focus on our priorities here.
I mean, again, I think it's election winning. It's just simply to get rid of the cookies.
Yes, well, I challenge anyone, and I'm the Secretary of State for Digital. I have occasionally tried to click on that button where you say you don't consent, and you have a load of random questions. You're never sure whether it is a yes or a no. It's virtually entirely meaningless.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about something that's entirely meaningless. Again, your responsibility for sport, culture, as well as there's digital and sport. I mean, it does seem to me extraordinary that the government is going to bring in entirely meaningless vaccine passports, which won't save a single life, won't stop anyone getting infected, because we know from the Delta variant it isn't stopped by people being vaccinated. And yet on the 1st of October, we're told we're going to actually need vaccine passports to go not just to nightclubs, but possibly other major events with large numbers of people, including sports events or going to the theatre or the cinema. Can you tell me why?
Well, first of all, I don't want to have any restrictions unless they are absolutely necessary. I want them to be as minimal as possible and for as short a period of time as possible. Now, what we've said in respect of very high-risk venues, and a nightclub is one of those, because they often have very poor ventilation, people are in very close proximity, they meet lots of people. We've said that we are looking at bringing forward vaccine certification in those sort of venues. This isn't a radical departure for England compared to elsewhere. Much more draconian vaccine passports, for example, happen in Singapore. They have them in Israel. This is just a tool in the armory for doing so.
Were nightclubs high risk since they've been reopened all through the summer, when your colleague Michael Gove was happily in a nightclub in Aberdeen a few weeks ago? Are they high risk this weekend when hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of young people will be attending them?
You are at higher risk of catching COVID in a nightclub than you are walking down the street or elsewhere.
Well, that's indoors and outdoors. That's relevant whether it's a nightclub or not.
Well, and we're not sort of speculating on this. We undertook an extensive programme of research, and what that's shown is that the risk factors, as you say, are indoor versus outdoor. Okay. Good ventilation versus poor ventilation, being sat down versus moving around, in contact with few people versus more, on all of those sort of measures, there's big sort of
so
ticks
what
or
was
crosses
Michael
have looked
Gove
at
doing
tonight.
what was your colleague Michael Gove doing in a nightclub a few weeks ago if it's so high risk?
Well, it is a higher risk than elsewhere.
So why have you, I mean, you're obviously very concerned about this. You want to restrict the freedom of people to go about their daily lives. You're supporting that in the government. Why was Michael Gove, who is also one of the key people who makes decisions in this country about these things, why was he in a nightclub if a nightclub is such high risk?
Well, first of all, in this country, you're allowed to. We have a free country. You can if something is legal, you can do it, and that's exactly.
But he wasn't asked to show a vaccine passport, and neither was anyone else. So yeah. Why was it safe a couple of weeks ago for Michael Gove to be in a nightclub, and he thought it was clearly safe because he was in there dancing and everyone else was fine? Why was that safe then, and it's safe this weekend? You and I, we could go out to a nightclub this weekend, no problem at all. Not show vaccine passports, to be absolutely fine. But on the 1st of October, suddenly it will be too dangerous for us to do so unless we know that everyone there has been double jabbed. Can you explain what happens on the 1st of October and who's sending the memo to COVID?
Well, 2 points. First of all, on the memo to COVID, as you know, these things aren't binary. They are low risk versus high risk. So we are focusing on the highest risk areas. I'm doing this in order to try and ensure that we keep nightclubs open fully. I think the worst thing we could possibly do would be, for example, to have to impose social distancing caps and all those other dreadful things that we had to do at the height of COVID.
You didn't have to do it. No, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to be rude, sir. I really appreciate you coming on the show, but I don't think that it was never. It never had to be done. It never had to be done. It was a political decision.
Julia, I was trying to address your second point, which is about the timing. The reason why we are doing it at the end of September is that by that point, every adult will have had an opportunity to have access to 2 jabs. It clearly would not have been fair to say that you couldn't go into a nightclub if you'd not had the opportunity to have the jab.
Okay, and just responsibility for sport as well. Very soon we expect this to be brought in for football matches. It certainly is going to be that's certainly what's been touted as major events. You could go to a football match. You have to show a vaccine proof, not negative proof whether you've got not got COVID or not. You could just got to show vaccine proof. And yet most of the footballers playing in that Premier League match you're watching haven't been jabbed. That's a bit bizarre, isn't it?
Well, the first thing is that I would urge everyone, including those footballers, and indeed Jonathan Van Tam has met with them, to urge them to take the 2 jabs. The single best thing that anyone listening to this show that hasn't had one can do to make sure that we don't have to impose further restrictions through the autumn and winter is to have both of the jabs. In terms of those, certainly Premier League grounds are doing so on a voluntary basis. I was at the Royal Albert Hall the other day. They're doing so on a voluntary basis. I think it's entirely right that each individual club or institution makes up their own mind. In terms of the government actually mandating it, requiring it, there is a very high bar, and I really don't want to extend it unless we absolutely have to.
Why don't MPs need to show a vaccine passport to be in the House of Commons?
Well, again, you can go through the sort of criteria around there.
People moving around, very crowded, travelling around. Lots and lots of people. There are thousands of people working in the House of Commons, 650 MPs in the chambers, plus clerks and others, many in the older age categories. But apparently it's completely safe for MPs to be in the crowded Commons chamber without showing proof of vaccine passports, but not safe for a bunch of 18 and 20-year-olds to be in a nightclub. Do you understand why a lot of people think that this is actually more about control and not about science?
As a Conservative, I do not want to control people's lives in any more way than we absolutely have to. We are driven by the public health. As I've said, we will have this for as short a period as possible, for as fewer venues as possible, but in very high risk areas. I think it is appropriate to do this. And this is not, Julia, this is not making a sort of some outlier. Pretty much every country around the world is looking at doing exactly this.
Does that make it okay for us to take away a fundamental civil liberty? To have to show our medical records? I know I'm over time and I'm going to get shouted at by my team and shouted at by your team. But, yes, the justification that other countries are doing it doesn't really fly for me.
Well, I've given you a number of justifications. What I'm saying is we're not an outlier. And I would just dispute that it is a fundamental civil liberty to go into a nightclub without having a vaccine in the middle of a global pandemic.
We're not in the middle of a global pandemic right now. We're certainly not the UK, isn't it? That's, you know, we're back. We're learning to live with the virus. Last time I heard from the Prime Minister, we're going to have to leave it there. I know you're over time. We've got another interview. I really appreciate you joining us, Culture Secretary Oliver Dowden.